Chapter 3. On the morning of January 20th, 1965, I woke up excited. My birthday had finally arrived. Finally, an electric guitar. "Look under your bed," my mom told me. I leaned over excitedly and peered under the bed. I saw a big alligator print cardboard case. It looked like an acoustic guitar. My heart sank. I pulled it out from under the bed and opened the case. Sure enough, it was a used Japanese acoustic guitar with nylon strings. The top had been cracked and shoddily repaired. I was crushed. I closed the case and pushed it back under the bed. I didn't want to play it. My parents came from families that emphasized the need to keep kids down rather than lift them up. That was how they thought kids should be raised. They had made a point of not giving me something I wanted before, despite the fact that it would have been just as easy for them to do. They didn't want me to get a big head, I guess. Once I had rejected the guitar, they made me feel guilty about it, never acknowledging their role in this enormous disappointment. My friend from Scouts, Harold Schiff, did get an electric guitar for his birthday a few weeks later. A powder blue Fender Mustang with a mother-of-pearl pickguard. He immediately started a band, and he asked me to be the singer. Harold's friends Eric London and Jay Singer, whom I knew casually from Glee Club and Scouts, soon joined. Eric played bass in the school orchestra and just plucked the same instrument as a stand-up bass. Jay, who already knew how to play piano, had recently gotten an electric keyboard, a Farfisa organ. Harold got another kid he'd gone to Hebrew school with named Arvin Miro to be the drummer. It turned out that I recognized him from Glee Club too. Then I suggested we talk to Matt Rail, who lived next door to Eric. So Matt joined as the lead guitar player. Matt and I were the only ones in the group whose parents weren't doctors of one kind or another. Harold and Matt lived in houses as opposed to apartments. Their places had basements. Matt's older brother, John, already had a band too, and his parents were pretty tolerant about noise. Harold's mom didn't mind the noise either, and we'd have the Schiff's basement to ourselves, so that was where we set up first. Harold's basement was finished. The walls were lined with knotty pine wood paneling. There was a linoleum floor and even a window. There was a door to the backyard too, which was below street level. Harold and Matt would plug both of their guitars into one amp, and my vocals went through the amp used by Jay Singer's keyboard. I often banged a tambourine as I sang. That was something you saw singers on TV do a lot. Eric just had to pluck the bass as loud as he could. We ran through Satisfaction by the Stones and other songs by British invasion bands like the Kinks and the Yardbirds. And to take advantage of Jay's Farfisa sound, we learned Liar Liar by the Castaways. I loved it from the start. And even though all the kids had vague dreams of being rock musicians at that time, given the frenzy over the Beatles and the Stones, their parents had their lives planned out for them. These kids were going to become dentists and optometrists like their parents, and for them, the band was a lark. But I kept telling them, I am going to be a rock star. Matt Rail and I started hanging out a lot at his house. In addition to practicing together, sometimes we got to sit around during rehearsals of his brother John's band. Matt and I played music so much at his house that his mother eventually proposed a deal. If we refinished an old bookshelf she had bought upstate, we could officially call the basement our practice space. So we stripped the white paint off that old bookshelf and kept playing. Matt's parents were sort of proto-hippies. His mom had actually sung on the first Weavers recordings and was friends with Pete Seeger. She had babysat for Woody Guthrie's children. By the time I got to know his parents, his mom was still booking prominent folk and blues musicians for hootenannies in Manhattan. People like Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, and Leadbelly, as well as Seeger. I listened obsessively to the radio and knew the pop hits of the day, but at Matt's place, I was exposed to his parents' amazing collection of folk music. They had tons of country blues and old-time music and lots of contemporary folk by the likes of Bob Dylan, Eric Anderson, Tom Rush, Phil Oakes, Buffy St. Marie, and Judy Collins. Eventually, I pulled my acoustic guitar out from under the bed, and Matt showed me some chords. Then I took a couple of lessons from a woman who had placed an ad in the local paper. The first song I learned to play was Down in the Valley. Soon, I had a harmonica around my neck and was trying to mimic the folk music I now knew from Matt's house. The band continued to practice too, and that summer of 1965 we got our first gig. There was a mayoral election that year, and John Lindsay's campaign had a local office in our neighborhood. It was housed in a storefront, just an open room with bright lights. Harold was volunteering for the campaign, distributing pamphlets. I think he thought it was something mature and cool to do. And one day the guy in charge of the office was talking about some kind of party or rally and mentioned they needed entertainment. Even though he hadn't been talking to Harold, Harold piped up, I have a band. They invited us to play at the event. I guess it looked good for the Democratic Party to have neighborhood kids playing. We didn't get paid and not many people were there, but still, it was a gig. My first gig. Sometimes when the band practiced, I got Harold to show me bar chords on his Fender Mustang. The basics came pretty easily, but if I had realized then how long it would take me to become a somewhat proficient guitar player, I probably would have given up on the spot. At the time, though, it just drove me on. Messing around in the basement was fine, but I wanted to get an electric guitar of my own and get serious. I started taking the subway into Manhattan whenever I could to scour the music stores on 48th Street for affordable guitars. Those trips into town became pilgrimages for me. Between 6th and 7th Avenues, independent music stores lined both sides of 48th Street, and a block up, on 49th Street and 7th Avenue, was a sandwich shop called Blimpie's. I'd get a sub sandwich there or a Texas chili dog covered in gooey yellow cheese and chili and onions at Orange Julius, and then I'd wander the music stores. Back then you weren't allowed to touch anything. If you wanted to play an instrument, they'd ask, "Are you buying today?" And if someone didn't look the part, like me, they'd say, "Let me see that you really have the money on you." So those trips to 48th Street were not about playing, but about soaking in the trappings of rock and roll, drum kits, guitars, basses. And once in a while I spotted a musician I recognized from TV or from the music magazines I was starting to collect. I was in heaven. As junior high progressed, I started skipping school more and more to hop the bus to the subway and head for 48th Street. I would arrive early in the morning, before the shops were open, so this Jewish kid would go sit in a pew in St. Patrick's Cathedral on 49th Street and 5th Avenue and wait. I also found a record store a block from the cathedral called the Record Hunter, where they let you listen to records. They had banks of turntables with headphones, and you could have them open anything up and play it. That became my idea of a perfect day, waiting in the cathedral for the record store to open, listening to music, having a chili dog, and looking at guitars. Exploring closer to home, I found that if I took the southbound Q44 bus from my apartment to the last stop in Jamaica, Queens, there was a huge two-story record store called Triborough Records. They had thousands of albums, and since it was a predominantly black neighborhood, I was able to pick up things I had not been exposed to before: James Brown, Joe Tex, and Otis Redding, as well as black comedians like Red Fox, Pigmeat Markham, and Moms Mabley. I didn't always have money to buy something, but just being able to hold the records and look at the covers was enough to make it worthwhile. After I saved money for a year and added the money I got for my 14th birthday, I went to 48th Street one day and walked into a music store called Manny's. Eyeing a guitar, I said, "Can I see that one, please?" "You buying today?" came the response. "Yes." "Show me the money." I plunked down all the money I had, and the man behind the counter handed me the guitar I was going to buy. A 3/4 size 2-pickup Stratocaster knockoff built by Vox. It wasn't much of a guitar, but it was the one I could afford. It was cheaper than anything else because it wasn't full size, and besides, I knew nothing about guitars and could barely play. But now I really had my ticket out.